Gourevitch. Thank you so much. And now we're officially starting. Welcome to the Standing Board. My name is Nellie Kai Ayerdale. I'm the Standing Board Chair. Can everybody hear me? Would you just please nod? Thank you so much. This is Oceanids' 68th year, which is an official support group of the university. The Sounding Board is a joint effort of the Faculty Club and Oceanids. Our honorary chair is Christine Kavulakis, Associate of the Chancellor, and our president, Nigella Hilgert. In Oceanids, we raise money for grants and awards for students, support other UCSD events and activities such as the student-run free clinic. We offer many events for our members, and Sounding Board is one of these events. We would love to have you as a member, and I encourage you to join. It's only $35 per year. We are happy to see you via Zoom. Probably we will go back to in-person meetings very soon. And we have this event every first Thursday of the month throughout the academic year, except for January. Now, I would like to introduce you to our speaker, Dr. Peter Gourevitch. He's a distinguished professor emeritus, School of Global Policy and Strategy, UCSD. A little about Dr. Gourevitch. He's the founding dean of the School of Global Policy and Strategy at UCSD, and former chair of the Political Science Department. He's author of Politics in Hard Times, Comparative Responses to International Economic Crisis, co-authored with James Shinn of Political Power and Corporate Governance, and former co-editor with David Lake of International Organization. A graduate of Oberlin College, he received his Ph.D. from Harvard, where he was acting director of the Center for European Studies. He taught at McGill and chaired the selection committee of the International Affairs Fellowships programs at the Council of Foreign Relations. He received fellowships from Guggenheim, Russell Sage, and the Center for Advanced Studies in Palo Alto, and was elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences in 1995. The subject of the presentation is a current one. Is democracy in danger, and does the crisis in Ukraine make it worse? And as a reminder, if you could please keep yourselves muted. And Dr. Gourevitch, would you like to share your screen, please?
Yes, I'm now trying to do that. You're going to help me do it.
Awesome.
You're not allowed to go away. Is it on?
No.
Are you sharing?
I'll be here. We can see your screen. And now if you would like to enter in full screen mode.
Yeah, what do I forgot what I'm supposed to do that. You told me, but what?
In the lower bar.
Oh yeah, the lower bar, it's this little
right on the left of that one. Right.
The minus one right there.
The left one. Not the minus, but the one on the left.
This
there
one right
you
here.
That one.
We have it.
We have it.
Okay. Hi, everybody. So I should start?
Yes, and okay. Dr. Gourevitch, would you like to take questions at the end?
I prefer it. It, but this is such a difficult topic, a complicated topic that I think, people, if they feel very motivated, they can ask me a question while I'm going on. That's okay.
Perfect. And I will mute myself, but I will be here. Thank you so much.
Great.
Please go ahead. Thank you for being here.
Okay, it's my pleasure to be here. And let me start right away because there's so much material. You can imagine that this is very difficult and complicated topic. It's very emotional for me. Usually I'm able to keep my cool and give a topic on the stuff in my field and be very stable and professional. But this is a very difficult moment for me because I was very agitated about what happened on January 6th in the United States last year. And now what happened a week ago in Ukraine is added to that agitation. And so I am going to try to talk about the both of them and see how they interconnect, which I think that they do. And so let me tell you something about my background to see the ways in which these things interact for me professionally. Because professionally, my background has been for the past 50 years that I have studied both the politics of countries and the way they interact. My PhD from Harvard, I was both a comparativist in studying French politics with Stanley Hoffman, but he also gave a course on war. Stanley Hoffman didn't believe that comparative and international were different fields, they were connected. But I also studied international relations there. One of my professors was Henry Kissinger. I was his course assistant for 3 years in the 60s. So my career has entirely been about how these fields interconnect professionally, because I thought you had to understand both how countries worked and how they interacted to make any sense out of the interaction or out of how countries operated at home. Now, to add to that, there's my personal background. Look at this list of my family background, and you can see why I look at the maps of what's going on over there. I'm in a constant state of shock. My family comes from the Russian Empire. My mother was born in Odessa. My father was born in what is today called Dnipro, what was then Yekaterinoslav, then became Dnipropetrovsk. My grandfather on the maternal side was born in Odessa. My grandmother was born in what is now Moldavia, was then Bessarabia. My paternal grandfather, his family origin is in what is now Belarusia, and my grandmother, her origin is near Kharkiv. I was born in New York City in 1943. How did all that happen? How did I come from all that with all that happening? That's another talk. I can't explain it all to you right now. The fact of the matter is that my mother's family, when the Bolsheviks took over, they had to go to Berlin. And my father's father was not allowed to go to Berlin, and Stalin killed him in 1938. So my father was able to get out, and in 1931 joined my mother's family and the other Russian socialists who were in Berlin. When the Nazis took over, they went in 1933, they went to Paris. When the Nazis arrived in Paris in 1940, they were able to come to New York. I was born in 1943. That is a very interesting and complicated story, but I can't go over it right now. So you can imagine when I see the map of what's going on, those cities that I just gave to you, Odessa, Dnipro, Kharkiv, Belarusia is up there on the top. You can, well, I can't, I know my finger doesn't point to the top. Yeah, my pointer will point it out. That's Belarusia. This is Kharkiv. This is Dnipro, where my father was born. This is Odessa, where my mother was born. And so this is a really, in a great shock. What are my grades? Somebody asked me, where are you from? Are you Russian? What is my answer to that question? I mean, my mother identified with greater Russian culture. On the other hand, if you said to my mother, are you Ukrainian because you were born in Odessa? She'd say, no, I'm not a Ukrainian. Ukraine, the experience of many of people from this part of the world was that they weren't very well treated by the Russian Empire, nor by Ukrainians. On the other hand, if you ask them today, my parents are not alive. If I ask them today, how do they feel about what's going on? I have no doubt what they would answer me. I'm sure that my parents despise Putin and everything that he stands for, and would be horrified at the behavior of the greater Russian Empire is invading, the greater Russia invading Ukraine, and they would be very strong defenders of what Ukraine is trying to do and what it's trying to defend, which is to try to create a democracy. And after all, what is more amazing than the fact that they're now being led by a Jewish comedian? But then the question I want to ask you is, does that matter? Does the fact that he's Jewish really have any relevance to any understanding of what it is that he is trying to do in the Ukraine? And how are we to explain, how do we understand what it is that Putin is trying to do? What is going on? And I want to raise to you what categories you think that we need to try to explain of what he is going. The world is full of debates about all this. And I want to give to you some basic categories. Should we think about nation, or should we think about situation? When we look at Putin, do we think about him as a Russian? Is he defending Russia, or is he defending the situation of being threatened by the security that anybody in that situation would be? Or is he defending some kind of Russian history? Or is he defending his personal identity and his position in power? And I think this is very important, because I think many people, I would say most people, are in some way they're essentialists. I think the kind of conversation that I hear from many people is a typical explanation of somebody is, well, he's a Russian or a Ukrainian or Americans or Germans. That's what we call the essentialist position, that people are like that. They've always been like that, and they don't change. The alternative position is called situationalist. That cultures are complicated. How people behave depends on the situation. It depends on who's in power, and it depends on the circumstances, and there's nothing particularly eternal about it. And it depends. And so I think that I will, wait, I've gone too far here. Let me go back to this one. Oops, I went much too far. I don't know where this thing went. Okay. Sorry. Sorry, my apologies. Not surprising to you, I am very strongly an anti-essentialist. I don't believe in essentialism at all. If you look at, if you're an essentialist, then you think that Germany must be inherently Nazi, or Japan must be inherently destructive and imperialistic, or that America must be inherently racist because it was founded with racism. And I think that these things simply don't make any sense. Countries change and situations change. So I am very strongly a situationalist. And so therefore we have to think about what is it that Putin wants, or Putin and the power and the gang of power that's around him. And so what is it that he wants? What shapes his outcome? And I think there are different interesting debates that are going on, is how do we interpret that? Is he, an interesting debate I've heard is people have said, well, he's afraid of Ukraine joining NATO because he regards NATO as too strongly a threat to him. But other people have said, no, it's not NATO that scares him. It's Ukraine joining NATO that scares him. It's NATO being part of the EU that scares him. Because if Ukraine is part of the EU, then it becomes democratic and prosperous. And what he's going to see is right on his border is a successful, prosperous, democratic state. And that threatens his power base. The Russian people, as they see that, will be disturbed by it, and it will threaten his power system. You have to understand that, I mean, maybe you all do understand that Putin completely controls the media network there. I was in Russia last time about 4 or 5 years ago. I have some very distant relatives that still live there. They're, how should I say, my great grandfather, we are the cousin, well, however you define third cousins, 3 steps removed. We share the same great grandfather. And they're perfectly nice people. When I talk to them, it is as if the only television station, the only media they have is if all they've ever seen is Fox News on steroids, and they have no other alternative to them. When I started to talk to them about this, they started to ask me, well, how would I feel if Mexico were controlled by Nazis? And I looked at them and I said, you think that Ukraine is under the control of Nazis? They said, oh, yes, absolutely. Now, these are otherwise simply sensible, reasonable people. I thought, how in the world can they think this? Well, if that's the only news source that you have available to you, not so surprising. So I think that Putin is actually, well, my model of Putin is that he is really worried primarily about himself and his power system and that of the close people around him. It's not NATO, he's not NATO that scares him or all that kind of thing. This idea that he is defending the self-interest of he has to protect Russia against foreign threat. No, he doesn't have, he is afraid of the power, the instability of his power. And I think this idea that we scared him by expanding NATO too far, I think that is an exaggeration. I probably, had I been involved in that decision, I probably would have said we're going too far too fast. We should not be extending those guarantees as quickly as we did. But those countries were very frightened in the 90s and the 00s already. They wanted our help. And so we needed to do something for them. But I don't really believe that is the fundamental source of the problem. I think the fundamental source of the problem, I mean, I think that we should have been more cautious to them because we should have worried that he could behave this way. But I mean, in other words, his outrageous behavior is predictive. His nationalism is predictive, but it's not explanatory. So what can we do? let's get on to that. You guys don't really care so much about the theoretical debates that we have in our field about what's the proper way to interpret him, although it doesn't matter about what you think we can do. Well, have been surprised, like most of the analysts I read, about the West response to this has really been breathtaking. I would never have imagined that the Europeans would have gotten together so quickly and so thoroughly, seeing the amount of assistance that they're sending to them. Finland and Sweden saying that they want to join NATO, Switzerland breaking with its neutrality and freezing Russian assets. Germany deciding that it's going to increase its spending on a military thing. Nobody's been able to get these countries to do any of these things for the past 50 years. You know, the Americans have been complaining for years to the Europeans that they're not spending enough on their defense budget. Poland has announced it's going to increase its defense budget to 3%. People have been asking them for years, the Europeans, to spend 3% of their GDP on defense, and they don't spend. Yes, I'm not a Trump fan, as you can imagine, but I think that all the American leaders have been complaining to the Europeans that they're not spending enough on defense. They're freeloading off the United States. I agree with that complaint. American leaders have gotten no successful results, and now Putin is showing that actually all this nice talk about being friendly doesn't get as far as actually sending troops someplace, wakes them up to the realities of the modern world. So I think Biden has been very skillful in doing this. I think there's been a lot of shock that how could the same group of people that mismanaged the departure from Afghanistan have been so skillful in what they've been doing for the past couple months as Putin has been saber rattling. Their propaganda attack, revealing all his moves before he made them, was very skillful. It mobilized the Europeans. There has been quite a remarkable sense of unity and response, and it has been, I think, startling and shocking to Putin. At least that is what we read. On the other hand, no one who wants to use force against Russia. Are you seeing anybody? I've heard no one, not a soul from any political point of view, say that they want to use force against Russia. No one is proposing, actually, they're proposing sending almost everything to Ukraine, but I'm not seeing anybody sending actual human beings, foreign troops to Ukraine. No Americans or Europeans in uniform. Maybe people out of uniform, but nobody in uniform. And is all the sanctions enough to do anything about it? I don't know. I'm gloomy about this, quite honestly. I don't think that will work. I think that Putin is not self-restrained. He is willing to destroy. He's willing to conquer a territory and destroy it. Now, what is the effect upon that? I think that is going to have negative effects on him. I don't know. You know, you probably read the same stories that I do, that there are soldiers refusing to fight once they realize what's going on. Do we believe these stories? Come on, folks. We should be suspicious of our own media as well. These are the stories that we want to hear. The Ukrainians want us to read stories that Russian soldiers are putting down their troops and guns and running away, or causing the gas to run out of their tanks. I don't know if these are true. There are stories of Ukrainians sending media stories back into Russia to family and friends. I don't know. I think it is also the case that there are tremendous interconnections between Russians and Ukrainians, that they are very intermingled in terms of family and friendships and economic and historical life. They fought in the armies together. They're shared a tremendous shared experience for hundreds of years. So this is going to be a very strange experience. Now, is this enough to split the regime? The only way to get rid of Putin is to have somebody want to get rid of Putin. I mean, Stalin conveniently died. I bet you that Putin is not in good health. Will he conveniently die? I don't know. I doubt it. But is there anybody there? Are there any big cracks in the regime? Is there enough are people willing to popular protest? Every time I read that there are popular protests going on in Russia, I'm amazed with admiration for those people, because they're going to get arrested. they're going to be put in prisons, which are miserable. It's going to be put on their records. They're going to suffer for years in their lives and their families. And the people in the Ukraine who are doing battle, they're going to suffer. These people, all these people are going to suffer terribly. So I think it all very tragic, and I am not confident that the long run results are going to be very good. And so what can we do on our side? Well, I really think this leads me into the second half of my talk, which is what I was going to talk about in the first place, which is what about the American divisions and what is their cause and what can we do about it? I do think that it matters a lot what our side is, because I do think that one of the things that tempted Putin to do this in the first place was his observation of the tremendous divisions in the West. He thought that Europe was in shambles. There was no unity in Europe. There was no capacity for leadership. Europe, what is that? Who are the leaders in Europe? There are no leaders. Nobody's doing anything. Merkel is resigning, is retiring. She's the only person of any skill whatsoever. Macron is, be lucky if he wins re-election. Johnson is a boorish oaf. The Italians are divided. What leadership is there in Europe? None. Then look at the United States. He's had this oaf going over there for the last 4 years, attacking every institution that the West has built up for the past 75 years to create unity, and going around attacking it, saying it doesn't do anybody any good, and saying pro-Russian things all the time. Lord only knows what they have on him that gets him to say that. Is he really that dense? I don't know. I think he owes them a colossal amount of money. They're the only banker. No bank in the world will lend Trump any money. Only the Russians do. And he doesn't, what he's scared about with his taxes is that his taxes will reveal how much money he owes to the to Russian oligarchs or the Russian state. Or maybe his deal is that he wants a Trump Plaza in Moscow. I don't know. But I think that Putin looks at the United States, doesn't think of a very divided place, and not capable of any collective action. So, you know, from the standpoint of deterrence theory says you have to deter. If we didn't want Putin to do all this stuff to go into the Ukraine, it should have been deterred. Well, a fragmented West and a fragmented United States doesn't look like places that have the capacity to undertake the kind of collective action that it would take to deter. So our internal divisions certainly contribute to the problem. And so let's look at those. You know, they've encouraged Putin. And so the Afghan withdrawal didn't look too cool. And Trump's attacking every institution from NATO, EU, World Bank, WTO, IMF. All those things were put together with a lot of work from 1945 on. That didn't help much. So having looked at the last 3 weeks for a little while, let's look at January 6, 2021. If the last 3 weeks can make you very agitated and upset, so can January 6, 20 and 21. Okay, so I'm 78 years old and I've been studying political science for 50 years. And I come from a very political family where none of my parents did that. My father was a scientist. He was a microbiologist who invented pharmaceuticals. And my mother studied chemistry, but then she had to flee Europe and she became a language teacher, and my brother was a physicist. So I'm the black sheep in the family. I did political science, but they were all very interested in politics, so they talked to me anyway. But I never thought that I would live to see the day when I thought that we would see an election questioned. The essence of democracy is the most important characteristic I think anybody would say compared look at democracies is that you have a method of picking as a successor which is accepted and which works. And so to have on January 6th the idea that that election wasn't proper and that they actually tried to use physical force to stop an electoral count and attempted an attack upon the Capitol building, that's a very great shock that I myself have not gotten over. So the challenge of the voting process, saying that it's not legitimate an election, and then the work that's being done to undermine voting, which is the very essence, it seems to me, of democratic processes, which is that you have legitimate, everybody can vote, they can vote fairly, their vote is counted, and you pick a successor. People are defeated, they run, they're defeated, then you pick a successor. Isn't that the essence of democracy? So are we close to conflict, which is what I was going to talk with you about. I think that we're closer to conflict than I ever would have dreamed possible. And if there's a lot of books written about this, and if there's one book I recommend to you, it's the book that just published by my colleague, Barbara Walter, and it's this book, How Civil Wars Start. She just published a couple months ago. I don't know if she's one of your speakers, the Oceanids, but she's all over television. This is a very big success, this book. And I tell you, the reason I like this book is because it's comparative. I think it's a very big mistake to try to ask this isolated. It's very hard to get inside a thing like, is the United States facing civil war or acute conflict? It's hard to ask that in isolation. Well, compared to what? And it's not just compared to ourselves and our past histories, but it's compared to other histories. There's another excellent book. My favorite book before this one came out was this book, How Democracies Die. It's also comparative, but in a less systematic way. That was published 4 years ago by 2 Harvard professor guys that I know, and it's a very good book. But I'll tell you why I like this one, why I recommend this one to you. It tells a lot of stories that from all over the world that are very relevant to you, that they will be familiar to you, and it puts them together in a systematic way. And it does a great job in the American thing, and it does something that may seem very, wonky, very, oh my God, this is what political sciences do. I don't want to go near it, but she's done a good job in getting it across in ways I'm sure every single one of you would understand quite easily, because she got involved with a bunch of people from, I wrote it down someplace, like, doesn't matter. There's a group based in, Political Instability Task Force, an international group based in Scandinavia. And there's a bunch of these groups that have for years been measuring countries on a variety of indicators, and a large variety of indicators, to see, first they're measuring which of them is democratic and which of them are dictators, and then what are the various measures that indicate where are they on these scales. Okay, we develop a democracy dictatorship scale. Where are they on those scales, and what are the characteristics of these countries that correlate with that? How divided are they? How prosperous are they? What's the degree of religious difference or ethnic difference, or what's the level of education? What kind of education? What kind of employment, level of unemployment? Every indicator that you could want. And they try to go around and measure it, and then they try to scale it. And so they came out with some interesting findings, the kind of things that you're not going to get if you just take one case or a couple of cases. What they found was that the countries that wind up having the most conflict are not the ones on either extreme. It looks like this or like this. The democracies are pretty stable and the dictatorships are pretty stable. The countries that get into conflict are the ones that are in between, and they invented a word called anocracy to define the countries that are in between. That is the ones that are not fully democracies, not strong democracies, nor strong dictatorships. They are the ones that start having problems. And they went further than that. They said it's not just how much divisions there are in the country, but some further characteristics of those divisions. In other words, they found countries that had a lot of ethnic fragmentation that seemed to do very, very well for a very, very long time. What you had to do is you had to find ethnic and other kinds of fragmentation, but it also had to be mobilized. If it correlated with mobilization on party lines, the chances of conflicts go way, way, way up. Okay? So what motivated Barbara to write this book was that she started to notice that the United States was going down on the Anocracy, the Democratic indicator. It was increasing its participation in the Anocracy level, and she was starting to find the other indicators of of getting conflict in these other ways. So she was finding that there was a lot of greater factionalization in the United States than she had seen before. By factionalization, I mean factions and groups. Factions, I hope so. I can't, it's in an audience, in a live audience, you can see people raise hands. If we were all together in a group, I would ask how many of you have seen the play Hamilton? And I bet you a lot of you have, and you've heard about it. Well, some of you raise your hand. Well, I tell you that Hamilton as a play, as a musical, as excited political scientists know, and they're absolutely ecstatic about it, because Hamilton is one of the gods of American political science. He's one of the authors of the Federalist Papers. And the Federalist Papers, if any of you took political science 101 on American politics, you know that we assign the Federalist Papers galore, because the Federalist Paper lays out the political theory that lies behind the American political system. And the basic idea is was to control factions. They worried that any society was full of people with factions, and they wanted to lay out a government that could manage the interaction of factions. We can't get rid of factions. That's what people in societies are like. But we can set up a political science that can manage factions. I mean, a political system that can manage factions. Okay, so you've all heard of factions because you've all gone to see the movie Hamilton, the play Hamilton, which talks about that. So what Barbara has seen is that a tremendous increase in greater factionalization. And the core idea that people are noticing is that a large number of people are feeling displaced. They're knocked off the center. They're used to feeling that they're the dominant group in American society, and now they feel knocked off by that. The white America, and you see this correlates with race very strongly. White America used to think that they were the sons of the soil, they were the center, and now they feel threatened by various kinds of immigration and social change. Asian, Latin American, Middle East, plus the rise of the women's movement, gays, the challenge of gender. And I put on top of that the disrespect that they feel by the people from the two coasts who look down on them. They feel this constant theme that you get when you read this literature. They feel disrespected. And so there is a tremendous growth of that. And Barbara has seen, there are a lot of indicators for that, and that to them indicates a rise of potential for conflict. In addition to that, there's been a weakness of institutional commitment to defending the procedures and the process. That's the major theme of this older book, is when people are not defending the guardrails of the political system anymore, the electoral system. That's why the failure to defend the electoral system, that so many Republicans are unwilling to accept the outcome of the electoral process and challenging them, saying it wasn't a fair process, is very shocking. And all the changes of the rules that they're making, the electoral rules, is very, very shocking. And the refusal of the Supreme Court to accept that gerrymandering is a violation of voting rights, and that they're accepting limits of people's voting rights, making it hard to make people vote. This is all very shocking. So Barbara also goes on to point out that if we're thinking about the rise of conflict, it's not the model we shouldn't have is 19th century civil war of soldiers marching towards each other. It's the rise of disruptions, violent incidents like the effort to capture the governor of Michigan and take her as a hostage someplace, or the demonstrations in Charlottesville, or vigilantes going around shooting people or shooting people at the border. Civil disobedience, people refusing to pay their taxes or refusing to get vaccinated or refusing to wear masks, attacks on elections. That's what she sees is going on, and that's what she thinks is going worse. Have things gotten worse? Well, I went through that really already. Political disagreements, weaker procedures on fair elections. I think what's going on in the courts is, I think ranking right up there amongst the violation of civil procedures is the way in which McConnell led the packing of the Supreme Court, and I misspelled his name to show you my lack of respect for him. is I think that what McConnell did with Garland and to manipulating the court, the idea that Garland couldn't be picked because it was a year away from an election, and then turning around and stuffing Barrett through 3 weeks before an election, that's a spectacular example of politicizing things. And I think it's helped lower the legitimacy of the Supreme Court, which then weakened, in my view, the Supreme Court is a less legitimate institution because of the way it's been picked. And so what to do? Well, we have to have fair and honest elections. We have to break gerrymandering. We have to have equality of taxes. What to do? We also have to lessen inequality. I think that the inequality that we have in the United States contributes to the polarization. But I want to, would people be as angry if their communities weren't being ripped apart? We read so many stories of jobs disappearing, communities closing up, all that kind of thing. It would, but I don't. I tend to be somebody who goes down that path. If people had more opportunities, they wouldn't be as angry. But I don't want to overdo that. I try to restrain myself with caution. The comparative research only supports that up to a point. All over Europe, they have much stronger safety nets than we do. And there are lots of angry people running around. So that if you're comparative, it puts a little restraint. All the things that we say that are wrong in America, well, so many of them are not as bad in Europe, but they also have a lot of problems. So what can you do? Let me end with something about what can you do? Well, I would say that one thing that you could do is pay more attention to what goes on locally. I believe that a lot of things can be done locally. If you're a Republican, go to local GOP meetings and complain about that the Republican Party is participating in this absurd belief of electoral subversion. Kevin McCarthy comes from California. He's the leader of the Republican minority in Congress. Go to the local GOP meetings and complain. You know, GOP meetings happen in every county and every community in the country. You can go to a GOP meeting if you're a member of the Republican Party and say, what are you guys doing? If you're a Democrat, you can do the same. There are close elections. California is not a state which is very close in terms of national elections. So you can think, what's the point? Why should I be exiting California? But you can do very important things in California. There are close elections everywhere. I live in the northernmost congressional district. I live in Solana Beach. So that district, which is 11, I can't remember, it's the 50th, I think, has now been gerrymandered so that it's a very close district. And he is one of the marginal seats. So you want to worry about what happens to Congress, which matters a lot, go volunteer, do work for 11. The Board of Supervisors has now become an important institution because it handles all the public health issues in the county of California. Everything in public health is not the responsibility of the city councils or San Diego, it's the responsibility of the Board of Supervisors. So you could do that. There's a very interesting book about the importance of localism. By some of you may recognize this author, Jim Fallows. He and his wife traveled all over the United States. They looked at towns where they were interested in what works. How come things work in some towns, despite different great degrees of political disagreement? Things work very well in some towns. And so he studies that. He and his wife traveled all over the United States. He learned how to fly an airplane. So they fly all over America and they study these things. And that's quite a good book. And I believe in its message. If you're discouraged by national politics, work at the local level and see what you can do there. Let me just conclude with this, is I think these two crises, how we function at home shapes our response in the world. Putin is defending his position as a leader of a large kleptocracy. We have to hang tough. We have to push back to avoid a big war. We have to resist. And the important thing that we do, I think, is to make sure that our democracy at home is vital and strong. And an important thing that we could do is to work in our communities wherever they live, protect our school boards, protect our city councils, protect our local police forces to do reasonable jobs, and make sure that we have a vital local democracy, because the national one will only be as good as the local one. Okay, I think we still have a few minutes for questions, Nellie, and you tell me how to handle that.
Thank you so much, Peter, for this wonderful presentation. If we were, as you were saying, a show of hands, everybody would be clapping right now. Thank you very much. And I will, if you would like to exit the
Sure.
sharing screen, and I will open the chat room here. And also, if you would like to raise your hand, we could do it virtually, or I can check here if I can see somebody that would like to ask a question to Professor Gourevitch.
Oh yeah, you can use the reactions and raise your hand that way. Yeah.
Yes, it's the little reactions icon at the bottom, or just unmute yourself. Let me know. Martha, did you want to ask something? Please go ahead.
Yeah, so can democracy survive?
Oh, absolutely. I'm not a gloomy person in that regard. I don't think there's any reason to think democracy is not going to survive. Absolutely. I think democracy is, it relies on us. It relies on our willing. That's what I was ending with, the local activism. I really think that, none of us, or very few of us, has the kind of reach that's going to, pick up the phone and tell Washington to do this, that, the other thing. But I think democracy, the health of democracy turns upon your involvement wherever you live, or, whatever organization that wherever you find action meaningful, that is what democracy is all about. And I don't see why it can't survive. The American democracy is perfectly capable of being vigorous and active. I mean, we can have, good school boards and good schools, and we can work with the police. I'm a liberal Democrat who's pro-police. I thought that Biden's comment the other day was a perfectly good one. There's no ridiculous to disarm the police. That's a ridiculous phrase. I'm all in favor of police reform, but not disarming them. The police have to be accountable and responsible. But disarming them is a ridiculous phrase. So, but that has to become, we have to participate in that. That's what, when you say, is democracy in danger, Martha, what do you mean?
I think we've gotten lazy.
Yeah, I think so too.
And we get messages from the media, and it makes us lazier.
Well, I think media democracy is a terrible kind of democracy. If that's what we mean by it, it's not gonna, if that's what you mean by it, Martha, I see your point. In other words, if what you're worried is, can it survive because are we gonna continue to be lazy? That I don't have a deep answer on. Will we continue to be lazy? Do we find the media thing, some of us aren't so young, and so getting out there to these meetings isn't such an easy thing to do. But what's interesting about that with the media is that these media methods of involvement are quite amazing. You can call any place in the country on your telephone. You can go to meetings. I think that the weird effect of Zoom has been to break through the communication system so that you can do lots of things by Zoom. You can call other, I could get active in the 50th electoral vote without ever leaving home. I do
spend money.
Yeah. So yeah, you can be as we're older and getting out is harder, you can still be active. But I think it does turn on that. If what we want, I don't like to watch most of the media things of the people that I agree with. I don't watch them because I don't want to hear the same thing over and over again. And so I just don't look at it. And so, yes, if that's what people want, democracy is sort of in trouble. And I think that that's a very important point you're making. But what is our answer? Our answer is not to do that. We don't have to do that.
You have to have duels.
We have to have what?
Duels.
Yeah. The other amazing thing about the media, though, is think of what's available to us on there. If you want to find out what in the world is going on in the world, right, going on in Europe right now, you can read a lot of the British papers, or you can read whatever foreign languages you have available. You don't have to go out and buy. You don't have to go buy them. You don't have to find a local. I remember you have to go, when I was a graduate student, I had to find the local newsstand that carried the European papers.
All right.
Yeah, I was lucky enough. I was a graduate student at Harvard, and there was a local newspaper in Harvard Square that carried a whole range of European newspapers. And I would go find the French one, or I arranged to have the Harvard Library, deliver they would send their older newspapers to us so we could look at them there. But that aspect of being provincial is gone. It doesn't matter where you are. You can be sitting in your own home and read the French newspapers, the German ones, the Russian. Depends on what language you read, but you can read anything. And so you don't have to be isolated and provincial if you don't want to.
Peter, I have a quick question, and it's got almost like a whole complete subject, but I am Mexican, and it worries me that we may have in our backyard a dictator, as you know, and that things in Mexico are looking bad with the president.
Yeah.
What's going to happen if we do indeed have this person staying in power and it becomes a dictatorship? Is the United States going to close borders? What's going to happen with that?
I don't know. I don't think I can. I mean, there are a lot of countries to talk about, and each of them can pose a problem. Mexico is one of the most important countries that we're next to, and AMLO is kind of a complicated guy, and I don't know. I hear, that's a case where the more stories you read, the more different points of view you get.
Yes.
I have my wife likes to go to Mexico. She owns an apartment there in Coyoacan. She has a lot of friends there, and she gets all kinds of opinions. She has friends who love him, and she has friends who hate him.
Yes.
And she has friends who think that he is saving Mexican democracy, and she has friends who think he's destroying it. And so what happens depends, I don't know. And what the capacity of America to do anything about it is, we're not going to invade Mexico.
Yeah.
So we're not going to, the nature of the interventions. I mean, there's a lot of contradictions going on here in this world. I think one of the terrible mistakes that America has been making for the past 20, 30 years has been overactive intervention on the excuse that we're going to do democracy building in foreign countries. It's very difficult to do democracy building in foreign countries. That's what we're not doing. The issue in the Ukraine is not to build democracy. They had figured out a way of doing it themselves. What we're trying to do there is prevent Russia from destroying them. But intervening in other countries to build democracy, that's a very difficult thing to do. What did we do in Germany and Japan after World War II? We intervened in Germany and we repressed the fascist forces. We prevented the Communist Party from organizing there. The Russian intervention knocked off a big chunk of Germany. All the Junker landowners, the biggest state owners, disappeared because those lands were now part of Poland and East Germany. The entire country was reorganized economically, and the entire country was reorganized politically. They had a strong democratic movement already there. They had Adenauer, who reformed a new political party, the Christian Democratic Party, and made it democratic. The Social Democrats came back and reorganized the left. And so we intervened to help them create a democracy. We did the same thing in Japan. We reorganized the entire economy. We created land reforms that all the biggest state owners lost their lands. They got turned over to the rice farmers, created a large, small society of independent proprietors. We reorganized the economy. We reorganized the political parties, and that's okay, now you can run a democracy. They had internal democratic forces that we could align with. That's very different than going into countries where there are no democratic forces and said, go do it.
Yeah,
That doesn't work.
right.
There's a chat question. How does local political
Yes.
action affect things rapid enough at a large scale that other local politicians getting experience? Well, and the second question is about political financing. Well, I think that political financing is a terrible problem, and I think the Supreme Court has behaved very badly in this regard. And I think that, but that Congress has to, the Supreme Court leaves it open to Congress to pass legislation that could do something about it. That legislation can be passed in ways that would get around that particular Supreme Court ruling and make it more restrictive. And well, it's not politicians getting experience for broader office. Local political action creates the foundations that translate, that add up. So if you've got active, I mean, for example, if you're a Republican and you want to stop the crazies, what's happening in the Republican parties? It's the activists on the right who are taking over the local parties. Well, the party. If you don't want that, then go work in the local Republican Party and stop them.
Right.
I mean, I think that the thing builds, it builds from the base.
Correct. Okay, thank you for answering the question in the chat. And I think we can wrap with this. We can wrap up with this, Dr. Gourevitch. Thank you so much for being here. This is a very interesting moment, to say the least. And thank you so much for this very interesting presentation.
You're very welcome. My pleasure.
See you next month. And
Sharing this with you. Oh, wait, there's a question. Wait, I see it. Oh, no, that's not a question. That's a hand clapping. Sorry.
yeah, we have hands clapping.
I like that. That's
Yeah.
one of my favorite little things. I always do that. I like hand clapping.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you so much. I'll see you next month, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.